Hello everyone, my name's Steve McGrath and I'm the Interim CEO at AlburyCity. It's my pleasure to take you through a high-level overview of AlburyCity's draft delivery program for the 2026 to 2030 period, and that includes the operating plan and budget for the 2026-2027 financial year. The AlburyCity 26-27 budget details the new initiatives and projects as well as ongoing activities that will help progress the actions within the delivery program and operational plan for the 4-year period from 2026. And this all works towards our community's vision and values as highlighted in the Towards Albury 2050 Community Strategic Plan. The Community Strategic Plan is broken into 4 pillars: a growing sustainable economy, an enhanced natural environment, a caring community, and a leading community. And I think one of the things that's really worthwhile mentioning here is that it's really important that the elements of the Community Strategic Plan are captured in the delivery program and the operating plan. And I like to describe it as having the golden thread. So it's very clear that the activities and projects that we're delivering are all linked very much to the Community Strategic Plan that's been supported by Council and obviously the community. This infographic, demonstrates the plethora of activities that AlburyCity is involved in on an annual basis. And I guess it gives you an idea of the diversity of the services and projects that Council provides. I'm not going to take you through all of it, but it's all things from treating sewage effluent, making sure you've got fresh chlorinated water for your activities in the household, but dealing with waste that comes through and ends up at the landfill or in the resource recovery facility, roads, footpaths, bridges, cycleways, recreational parks, both passive and active, indoor recreational facilities. There's a whole range of things that Council provides, and I think it's really important to acknowledge those elements of what we take for granted on a daily basis. In the period from 2026 to 2030, we propose to spend, in the way of operating budget, that is ongoing activities, $861 million. For the 26-27 financial year, the operating budget will be approximately $195 million. In the way of capital projects, the net cost to Council over the 4-year life of the program is $626 million, and that's split between what I refer to as non-generational projects. So that's the, by and large, infrastructure renewal, the asset maintenance activities regarding our current infrastructure, and $456 million in generational projects or new assets that are proposed to be delivered. Just a quick overview, in 26-27, for every dollar spent on general fund generational projects, we anticipate receiving 45 cents in the dollar in the way of grant funding. And those projects, generational type projects, are really infrastructure projects that are required to accommodate a growing city. I've already mentioned the sewer and water infrastructure, but new sports fields and parks to meet the needs of a growing population. And, I think that an important element here is to recognise that we don't attempt to fund those generational projects from current revenue. There is an element of loans that goes into it, and that's about recognising that there's a need to accommodate what's referred to as generational equity. And that means that future generations, future ratepayers are paying for infrastructure as they consume it by way of financing loans that are generated for the delivery of those projects now. In the context of non-generational assets, that is the infrastructure renewal, for every dollar spent, we expect to receive about 30 cents in the dollar in grant funding. And typically renewing existing assets like roads or buildings and other projects that support existing services for the primary benefit of today's community. In summary, the $626 million in capital initiatives centres on water and wastewater. There's a large proportion of it there. Roads, bridges and footpaths, various building upgrades, including the Albury Entertainment Centre, Albury Airport, recreational activities, both indoor and outdoor, and passive and active recreational activities. Probably the one I'll just describe a little more is flood prevention and drainage improvements. AlburyCity has been the subject of some fairly significant storm events in recent times in areas where the infrastructure that was put in place under the ground to accommodate stormwater was designed and delivered to meet the standards of the day, some of it 50 years or so ago. In today's environment, what we're seeing is an increased prevalence of natural disasters or major storm events, and the intensity of those events is much, much worse than what was probably experienced 30 to 50 years ago. So you're trying to get high flow of water in a very short time frame into infrastructure that wasn't built to accommodate the events that we're incurring today. Retrofitting infrastructure into highly built up areas of the city is problematic and also very costly. So it's something that council is exploring to work out the best way to approach it in the longer term. Delivering essential infrastructure in the 26 to 2030 period will include projects like roads, bridges and footpaths and bike paths to the tune of about $28 million, flood prevention and drainage to the tune of about $15 million, Saguna Link Road stages 1 to 4, $34.3 million, Saguna Link Road stage 5, $2.7 million. And then the next 4 projects are all water and wastewater related. Waterview, stage 2 of the wastewater treatment plant, $120.3 million. The main sewer pump station upgrade and the new rising main at Wodonga Place Depot is a touch under $90 million in value. Sewer infrastructure along the Riverina Highway is a touch under $50 million. And the water supply and feed pipelines for Saguna Main project, $36.8 million. If you look at all of those infrastructure projects, some of them are about improving our infrastructure to accommodate existing population, but also catering for the growing population. But the bulk of it is about recognising the growth of the city and the need to be prepared to cater for that growth into the future. Several key major projects or generational projects. Albury Entertainment Centre Convention Wing redevelopment. There is an element of that is about infrastructure renewal, but there's a substantial increase in the capacity at that facility, and that's a project that's in the vicinity of $36 million. The Animal Care Centre redevelopment, $6.5 million. Probably an important project for the region because through service level agreements that council has with a number of other authorities, both in Victoria and New South Wales, we provide that animal care service for those areas. Of course, they pay for that service. Oddies Creek Splash Park, $5 million. Albury Airport runway overlay. Notwithstanding there's been some significant upgrades out there in the last 12 to 18 months, there's a need for a runway overlay, and that's running at about $9.5 million. A number of those projects and others are funded by way of grants from various levels of government. Through the 4-year period, we're anticipating $52 million in grant funding for key capital projects. In respect of the Albury Entertainment Centre Convention Wing redevelopment, $25 million worth of grant funding, $10 million from the federal government and $15 million from the New South Wales government. The Albury Airport runway overlay that I mentioned has about $4.5 million coming from the other levels of government. Oddies Creek Splash Park, $2.5 million from the federal government. Flood South Albury Levy, the construction phase, is attracting $2.2 million. And Get New South Wales Active, the Albury CBD Bike Loop project, is attracting New South Wales government funding of approximately $2 million. All of these projects are really important in the way of having grant funding for capital projects and being able to cater for the growth of the city. What does our operational budget look like? Where do we get our money from in the 2026-2027 financial year? We're expecting income for operating purposes of about $195 million, of which 50% will come from rates and annual charges. So it's a significant slice of our budget, but you can see that there's not a total reliance on annual rates and charges. About 38% comes from user fees and charges for various activities. Grants and contributions provide for operating purposes runs at about 5%. We get a significant stream of income from interest on investments, about 5%, and the inevitable other column is about 2%. I can just speak for a minute about the grants and contributions for operating purposes, in particular grants. Um, you know, local government in New South Wales, and I guess across Australia for that matter, has been quite reliant on getting operating grants from both state and federal government sources. What we've seen over the last 20 to 30 years is a significant reduction in the level of those grants that are received for operating purposes, and that puts an increased strain on individual councils about how they go about continuing their services. Albury City is not immune from this process. If you think about the fact that financial assistance grants, when were introduced at 1.2% of personal income tax, and at the time, the legislation, if I remember correctly, suggested that needed to increase, the percentage needed to increase. The reality is that today, local government and across Australia, we receive a pool of funds that is 0.5% of personal income tax. And that's a significant challenge for councils to maintain their ongoing operating activities as a result. Looking at our capital income stream, in the 26-27 financial year, we anticipate managing a capital budget of 120 million. The revenue stream for that, 37% of it is funded by federal and state government grants. 44% comes from what we call our operating cash flow or from our rate revenue. And 19% will be funded by way of borrowings, that is loans, to deliver some of those generational capital projects that future generations will enjoy. Turning to your rate bill for the 2026-27 financial year, the average residential property rate will be $1,659, and that represents an average increase of $1.04 per week, or 3.6%, which is in accordance with the rate peg on the general fund. There are other charges on your rate notice, obviously. Waste charge is proposed to increase by 12.5%. The sewer charge and the water charge, both individually, are proposed to increase by 8%. And when you add rates, water, sewer, waste management charges and the general fund all together, you can expect that the average residential property will pay an overall increase of 6%, or approximately $3.79 a week. Business property rates will increase by an average of 2.9%. In the context of how that money is spent, if we look at $100 of rates and break it down, approximately $43 goes to roads, buildings, footpaths, cycleways, maintenance and other activities. For recreational facilities, both indoor and outdoor, $23 out of the 100. Arts, culture and libraries, $10. Environment, sustainability and waste, about $5. Community, which includes children's services, community services and community development, cemeteries and crematorium, etc., about $6. Economic development and tourism, including the airport, about $9. And city planning and development, which is your strategic planning and development assessment activities, about $4 out of the 100. If we turn to the financial snapshot for the 26-27 financial year, the consolidated draft budget result is forecast to return a deficit of 2.4 million. Now that includes the water and wastewater funds, which are both projected to deliver a surplus, but it's combining the consolidated result combines those with the general fund. The important aspect here is that general fund is budgeted to record a deficit of $18 million in 26-27. That includes a $29 million non-cash entry for depreciation expenses, but I believe it's really important to recognise depreciation in the year that it's incurred, because it demonstrates how much of our asset or infrastructure is being consumed by way of depreciation in any given year. The really important thing here is that the $18 million deficit is not sustainable. In 24-25, there was a $26.3 million deficit result. In the current year, we were, as at the December half-yearly review, we were projecting a $20.4 million deficit in general fund. That has been improved to the point where we're about to present a March quarterly budget review to council, and that's projecting about an $18.9 million deficit in the current year. I guess the message here is that there is a slow improvement, but we really need to pay some attention to it because long term that is not sustainable. In the context of financial assistance grants that I mentioned before and the importance of operating grants, but financial assistance grants from the federal government account for $7.9 million, which represents 77% of all operating grants received from government. And if you think about the principle that I talked about previously, that financial assistance grants are running at 0.5% of personal income tax, if that was moved to 1%, you can straight away see there's about another $8 million that would assist greatly in enabling council to continue doing what it does year in, year out. Council is proposing new general fund loans of $22.7 million to help fund the $73 million capital works program. This is expected to add, unfortunately, $2 million in annual loan repayments to our operating profile in an ongoing way. So whilst it's good to get the money in to be able to deliver the capital projects, we do have to pay it back. Importantly, to respond to the current general fund deficit situation, Council does have a financial sustainability program, and that's about strengthening Council's long-term financial sustainability. It is a key priority. The program responds to rising costs, the population growth, aging assets, and the structural budget pressures that we know we have. The aim is to restore long-term budget balance while protecting core services and community well-being. I need to be really clear here that whilst some of that is about looking at operational efficiencies and services that we provide and the levels of service we provide, Council has made no final decisions about potential service level changes. To be really clear, Council wants to be very transparent in regard to any options that may be considered, and that will have a strong basis of having community engagement and recognising the importance of engaging with our workforce around any changes before decisions may be finalised. The draft budget 26-27 sets out how Council will deliver essential services and infrastructure while managing ongoing economic pressures, including the operating cost rising faster than revenue. Since rate pegging has been in place, I think it's fair to say that rarely, if ever, has the annual rate peg been increased to the level of cost increases that Council incurs on an annual basis. So it's not just CPI, the construction cost index is normally quite a bit more than CPI, and the annual rate peg rarely keeps up with those increases. So on an annual basis, we're always looking for efficiencies in how we go about our business. The projected $18 million general fund deficit in 26-27 does require action to restore budget balance. And if you think about it, carrying forward deficits and the current spending patterns indicate ongoing deficits if we don't have some form of intervention. Aging infrastructure is increasing renewal and maintenance requirements across Council assets. The reality is that past reliance on debt has created repayment obligations that continue to constrain operating capacity. And with that, the population growth is increasing demand for essential services and infrastructure investment. And if I just look at the investment required into water and wastewater infrastructure over the next 4 years, it's really important that we get the balance right in our general fund to reduce the reliance on debt for general fund projects, because as we need to borrow for water and wastewater infrastructure improvements, our lenders will be looking at the overall profile to work out whether they lend to us. So getting that balance right is critically important for the future. And maintaining essential services while addressing the structural budget pressures requires a coordinated long-term approach. You can't expect to turn the situation around overnight. It needs a plan, and that plan needs some time to be implemented, and that's what we intend to do. That action is required to protect core services that you've told us are important and enable continued investment in infrastructure for a growing community. This little matrix just sets out a little bit of a risk profile over the next 10 years, and that is aligned to the long-term financial plan that has a 10-year duration, and that plan is available with a suite of documents that are on exhibition right now. But if you look at the plan and assume for a moment that we're not doing anything, just going to keep doing what we're doing, it suggests that in the short term, the next 1 to 2 years, that there's some improvements that are going to be generated, but we're still vulnerable. In the 3 to 5 year, the medium term, it suggests a significant risk is emerging with cost pressures for asset maintenance and materials and costs, and the accelerating water and sewer capital program will add to the complexities of how we go about financing our operations. In the longer term, the 5 to 10 year horizon, it's suggesting that there's broader structural risk. The structural imbalance will occur without some form of major intervention. The renewal gap around infrastructure funding widens, the asset base grows faster than income, and things like a special rate variation or major service reform is required. In the context of long-term financial planning, Council's LTFP, as I'll refer to it, provides a transparent 10-year framework to assess financial risks and to weigh trade-offs and support evidence-based decisions on services, infrastructure, and long-term sustainability. A lot of work is underway at the present time to try and make sure that we look at our organisation with a long, hard lens, and that's about looking at opportunities for efficiencies in how we go about our business. And I guess challenging the services that we provide, making sure that all of our services align with that golden thread that I talked about at the start, the community strategic plan and the delivery program. If we have services that don't align, we need to challenge ourselves as to why we're doing it. But ultimately that will come down to the council and the community making some decisions. And equally, we need to some regard, challenge the levels of service that we're providing and whether they are affordable longer term. If the desire is to keep them, how do we fund it? And for that reason, one of the things that council will be looking at is the potential for a special rate variation. And that process allows council to increase rates above the annual rate peg. An SRV, as they're shortened to, can help fund essential asset renewal, reduce borrowing, and support long-term financial sustainability. I need to be really clear that there is no proposal for a special rate variation in the 2026-2027 financial period. What council may consider, depending upon a range of trigger or threshold moments, is a special rate variation for the 27-28 financial year. But to do that, council would need to engage thoroughly with the community, probably commencing from June, July, subject to a council decision. The feedback from that process would be considered by council later in 2026, around November. And that would be a decision point as to whether to progress an SRV of some form. And ultimately, council needs to make application to the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal, or the IPART, and that needs to happen by February 27 if the desire was to pursue an SRV in the 27-28 financial year. So what are the options for Albury City in the context of the long-term financial plan? There is a 10-year long-term financial plan document contained within the suite of documents that are available on exhibition. And in summary, there are 4 scenarios that are mapped out in that LTFP. Scenario 1 is the baseline scenario, and what it projects is that if we do nothing, if there's no intervention, what happens if we just assume rates are going to increase with the annual rate peg, and we do nothing else about looking at the operations of the organisation. And quite clearly it demonstrates that in the shorter term, as I've mentioned, there might be some slight improvements, but longer term, the deficit in general fund will continue and it will continue to grow. And that is definitely not sustainable for the organisation moving forward. Scenario 2, there's a potential 42% special rate variation over 2 years, implemented at 21% and 21% in the second year as well. And that would return the general fund to break even within 4 years and reduce reliance on debt over the longer term as well in the general fund. Now that particular scenario is assumed implementation over 2 years, but it could be implemented over 3 years, for example, at 14%, 14%, 14%, designed to mitigate the impact on the ratepayer. None of this is locked in at this stage, and that will be determined more through the engagement process that Council will go through over the next 4 or 5 months. Scenario 3 similarly does rely on an SRV, but it's to a lesser level. And in this case, over 2 years, say 19% and 19%, similar to the scenario 2, that could be implemented over 3 years. But together with an approximate $3.5 million in ongoing service reductions. So it's like I describe it as a compact. We will ensure that the organisation is operating as efficiently as possible, but at this stage, it is hard to see that that is going to deal totally with the deficit situation. Scenario 4 assumes no SRV, but still sets a target of dealing with the operating deficit. And what that means is $18 to $20 million worth of annual service reductions. And that would potentially have a significant impact on services to the community. The issue with that is you have told us through engagement in the Micromex survey in the latter part of 2025 that there are a range of services that you value and see as important to your lifestyle, and you don't want to see impacts on those services. So we've got to find a balance somewhere, and that's what Council intends to do through the engagement process around a potential SRV in future years. Can I just finish by saying thank you very much for your giving your time and your attention, and we look forward to receiving your feedback. Thank you.